You ever notice how people say they want honesty, maturity, realness, but when you give it to them, suddenly you're the problem? Like, how dare you be emotionally aware in a world that thrives on avoidance? This episode right here, it's about reclaiming emotional maturity as your superpower and finally breaking up with the need to be understood by people who don't even understand themselves. Welcome back to the Powerfully You podcast. I'm your host, Sharitha, and I help emotionally wounded, spiritually curious folks heal from trauma and reclaim their voice so that they can stop people pleasing and start living their truth and turn their pain into power. Today's episode is a soul deep one. It's about emotional maturity, the kind that doesn't perform or pretend, the kind that gets you labeled too much, too deep, too sensitive, when really you're just too real for people who ain't ready to feel. Let's get into it. Being punished for emotional power. I'm just now realizing again that I do a lot of realizing. And maybe that's the story of my life, waking up to the same truth in different ways. Here's one of those truths. I've been apologizing for my emotional power, not for emotional chaos, not for lashing out, but for telling the truth, setting boundaries, for seeing straight through people and saying it with love. I learned early on that I learned only I learned early on that people can't handle my honesty. Even when I was gentle, they couldn't handle being held accountable. Even when I stayed calm, they couldn't handle boundaries with love because they were only used to boundaries that looked like punishment or silence. And when you're the only one in the room telling the truth out loud, suddenly you become the threat. But what I've come to understand is this: they aren't rejecting me, they were avoiding themselves. Gaslit into performing strength. I was taught my emotions made me weak, that strength looked like fighting, arguing, manipulating, and controlling. Nobody said strength was sitting with your emotions instead of throwing them. Nobody said strength was walking away without needing to destroy everything on the way out. Nobody said strength was crying and still showing up the next day. So I learned to question myself. I tried to shrink, to be less emotional, less intense, less true. But the conflict was my soul refused to let me go numb. Refused. And that made me the dramatic one, the too emotional one, the hard to deal with one. And really, I was just the one who felt. And feeling in a world that is emotionally constipated, that's an act of rebellion. Embodying emotional maturity unapologetically. So here's what I'm stepping into. I don't need to be liked to be real. I don't need to be understood to be valid. I don't need permission to feel deeply or speak honestly. I've been the mirror in too many rooms filled with people who don't want to see their reflection. And I used to resent that. I used to want to be like so bad. I dim my light just to stop making people uncomfortable. But now I honor the role I play. I am a mirror, not a messiah. It is not my job to save people from their own self-abandonment. It's my job to embody emotional immaturity out loud so those who are ready can finally remember what it looks like. That's what being powerfully you really means. Devil's advocate. But don't you think you're being a little self righteous? Maybe it's not that deep. Maybe people just didn't like your tone. Or maybe you really were too intense. I get it. I've gaslit myself with the same thoughts. But here's the truth: tone becomes the scapegoat when people don't want to deal with content. And intensity only feels threatening when you've been living on the surface too long. I'm not here to convince anybody I'm a good person. I know who I am. And I'm not perfect at all. But I'm not going to keep betraying my emotional wisdom just to fit in with emotionally avoidant people. If I got to choose between your comfort and my truth, I'm choosing truth every single time. Reflective moment. Let this be a moment of soul truth for you. Sit with these questions. journal them out, or just breathe through them. What parts of your emotional power have you been apologizing for? Who told you your emotions were too much? And what did that teach you to believe about yourself? What would it look like to embody your emotional maturity, even if no one claps for it? Are you still waiting for people to understand you before you give yourself permission to be free? What soul contracts with external validations are you finally ready to break free? Final soul truth. Your emotional depth is not the problem. Your clarity, your boundaries, your truth, they are not the reason people leave. They leave because they're not ready to stop hiding. You're done hiding. You're here to feel, to speak, to live in alignment with your soul. No more apologies. No more shrinking. Let the world adjust to you. You made it to the end of this episode, and that means you are ready to hear what your soul has been whispering all along. Keep feeling, keep healing, keep walking in your truth. Even when it shakes the room, you don't owe this world a watered down version of who you are. You are powerfully you. And I'll see you next time.